Welcome to the road to Acapulco. There's a new idea in town, an idea that's been heralded by Bob Podolsky for 32 years. It's an idea that will change the world, and it's beginning to take shape in Acapulco.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 18 of The Road to Acapulco. This is Michael Nimetz, and I'm here with Bob Podolsky. And today we're going to talk about trust, a very interesting word. And we're going to talk a little bit about the word, but then we're going to also talk about the various ramifications of what trust is all about, and how within our current system and our society that we know, trust isn't exactly equated with the value that it could be.
Right.
And if we did do that, we might have an entirely different world. So let's start off with the word itself.
Okay. Well, first of all, the word trust has two forms. One is supposedly a noun, and the other a verb. To trust is the verb. And trust is, one can talk about, in order to reach a certain level of closeness or intimacy, one must have trust. What is that? And I want to point out that it looks and sounds like a noun, but it's not. Technically, a noun represents a person, place, or thing, any one of which could be put in a wheelbarrow. And you can't put trust in a wheelbarrow, therefore it's not really a noun. It's a nominalization, a word used like a noun, but it actually represents a process or action. For our purposes, I think we need to talk specifically about the verb, to trust someone. And I have a definition of trust. I didn't get it from a dictionary, but I got it from many years of usage of interacting with people. And I say that trust is, to trust is to be willing to act on the presumption of accountability, which means simply that if I say I trust you, I'm saying that I believe you're going to do what you say you're going to do. You're accountable. And this brings us to the fact that most people, when they say I trust you, do not say what that really means. It means either I trust you not to do something I want you not to do, or I trust you to do something I want you to do. And we don't make that distinction in common parlance very often. And I recommend it. I think that being explicit about what it is we trust someone to do or not do is an important part of that message. Would you agree?
Absolutely. But I think that most people are kind of confused about what trust actually means and what their expectations are about what they say when they say, I trust you to do something. What comes about is their understanding of what those expectations are may be different.
Right.
And so then trust is broken, but it's not broken because one person promised the other person to do something. It's about the different expectations possibly that people have.
Right. That's the presumption of accountability that's left vague. Mm-hmm. Right. So it appears to me that, as you pointed out to me in the past, that trust is a very important phenomenon. And that's another nominalization, by the way, phenomenon, something that happens. It's not really a noun. But people use the word as if it were. And I do believe that that particular dynamic that you called attention to just now is crucial to the future history of our species. If we don't lick this one, we're going to be gone. Having a solid basis of trust in order to form meaningful relationships that are cooperative and peaceful is essential. You can't get to the goal of a peaceful world without having that in place.
Absolutely.
So say something, if you would. I know you have opinions on this and ideas about this. Would you say something about how you see the possibilities of bringing that into existence in our societies today?
Well, I mean, just describing the circumstances that we have today, you know, the roles that people play, you know, as we talked about a little bit there, are really confused. And so I think most of the things that are going on in our society are confused. Mm-hmm. And so when people take on a role, let's say husband and wife, for example, there's certain expectations that people have in regard to those. And by making a commitment to each other, they're essentially saying to each other that they trust that other person is going to hold up their expectations of what they're supposed to do. Mm-hmm. The problem is that the society, the media, the system has created a much different expectation for each of those particular people of what exactly that might mean, what a husband and wife role might be. And so, for example, a husband might think that it's about security or about stature in the community or something like that, whereas the wife might think it's about love and taking care and those type of things. Mm-hmm. And so they're approaching that same thing from a different point of view. And so when it comes to the word trust, the expectations are almost always going to be destroyed at some point.
Right, for lack of communication, really. I'm reminded, when in hearing what you just said, I'm reminded of the relationship that was the best relationship I ever had with my wife, Leah. When we got together, we were not particularly emotionally compatible. But we did one thing right. We made an agreement with each other that we would always share with one another what we thought and felt, particularly about and toward one another. And we lived up to that. And because of that, the relationship evolved into something that was, in my experience, the most magnificent part of my whole life. I mean, I see that relationship taught me love, which I had not really known prior. I had thought I had, but I was wrong. I did not understand love. I did not experience love. I was not able to express it effectively. When I did have instances of feeling that, I'm talking about love as a feeling now, but it's more a commitment. And that commitment began with that statement we made to each other, that promise, I'm going to tell you honestly what's happening with me. That was the basis of trust. And even though there were times when we were fighting like crazy for the first couple of years we were together, we trusted that whatever the truth was, we were going to hear it, and it would be expressed. And we did that. And the result was 38 years of incredible relationship, the likes of which I've never known before or since. I recommend it. I recommend that level of trust because it inculcates what I call human SYZYGY, a deep, deep sharing that results in each of the two people becoming somewhat more like the other. That is a very real phenomenon, and it can be seen and demonstrated and experienced for those willing to plumb the depths of their own awareness.
So in talking about that, if the relationship between two people is based on trust, and because of the society and the media and all these different things about setting up expectations for people that may differ, that essentially they're diminishing. The system is diminishing the amount of trust that people have with each other.
Right.
And essentially supplanting that with the trust in the things that, like, the government provides. Trust in a paycheck, trust in a social security system, trust in security and, defense of our country. Mm-hmm. Essentially people have been sold a bill of goods on all these things that, they have to have some pride in because it's the only thing they can trust is that, I'm an American,
Wow.
or I'm defending freedom. Because the other things, the trusting in people, trusting in partners, trusting in businesses, trusting in the people that you work for, have been diminished.
Right. And I think another element of that is the organized religion piece of that, which basically tells us to trust God, whom we never meet, most of us at least, never get to meet God face to face, or trust faith. Again, a nominalization. Trust faith. Well, be faithful. Have faith in this or have faith in that. In the absence of interpersonal trust, that kind of thing seems attractive. It becomes the only course of action we have when we don't have that level of trust between people.
So, essentially, the thing that the Octologue brings about is something that really is quite different than the experience that most people have today in society. And that is actually working with each other at a really different level.
Right.
That having the opportunity to talk to each other and talk to each other about things within themselves.
Right.
About questions about what they are, who they are, where they're going, all these type of things. This is an environment that kind of stuff can be discussed.
Right.
And this is where we really start to regenerate trust within each other.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I love the concept, as you know, and I attempt on a daily basis to live by this idea that I don't have to have an agreement with someone else that I'm going to be honest with them. I can just be honest. That's something I can initiate on my own, whether the person I'm talking to is willing to meet me in that kind of agreement or not. So far, I have found few people where I get the same level of agreement coming back at me. People don't learn that, and it comes down to the ethics. And this is where the Octologue is so good. The Octologue is based on the ethics, on a valid ethic. Okay, an act is ethical if it increases truth, love, awareness, or creativity for someone without limiting or diminishing it for anyone. That definition defines the Octologue ultimately, and it also means that people have to be willing to be really, really honest with each other within that Octologue. Otherwise, they're destroying truth. Truth
Absolutely.
is the issue.
Well, the thing is that, and I think, honestly, thinking about it, I think trust is probably a big stumbling block to the incorporation of Octologues in people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that most people even have a hard time trusting themselves.
Absolutely.
I don't think that people really have the ability to really express themselves honestly. And so, just like with this thing of, the PC language of everyday life these days, that people can't honestly express themselves about how they feel, how they are, what's going on, what's that over there.
Mm-hmm.
They can't even be honest about it. And before long, they start to even doubt who they are, what they're about, and what's important to them.
This really brings us to the most recent addition to the technology of the Octologue, which is we've incorporated the soul bonding technology. Mm-hmm. And the soul bonding technology has as its fundamental purpose increased awareness of who we are. Who am I and how do I get to be who I am? This is a question that the answers to that are obscured from us during infancy and toddler years. Before we're 5 years old, we are taught, not intentionally usually, but we are taught by family dynamics and family custom, we are taught not to know and not to remember how we got to be who we are. And because of that, we are never honest with ourselves until we change that. And if I'm not honest with me about who I am, how can I possibly be honest with you? That is the new piece that we've added to the Octologue technology. And I think you were right on in suggesting that. And it's absolutely necessary that people learn to be honest with themselves if they're ever going to be honest with one another.
Yeah, and so, I thought that when I first was introduced to the Octologue, essentially watching you on Anarchast, I saw it as a great organizational tool. But the reality is from my experience and what my continued learning, up until today, is much different than what I thought of initially. I certainly think today, witnessing and being a part of your soul bonding workshops and classes that we're holding now, that I'm learning a great deal about who I am and, what motivates me to do what I do. I've certainly always thought of myself in a particular way, but being able to really kind of engage my subconscious mind has really given me a much deeper and broader understanding of myself and what I'm capable of. I am really excited about the future because of my understanding of soul bonding today. And I really don't feel like I'm well versed at it at this point, but I certainly see the beauty of what it's about. And it certainly is about trusting yourself, because I think, this recent little test for me was kind of changing something about something I do through my subconscious mind and connecting with my subconscious mind and essentially asking my subconscious mind to help me. And so, again, it's, I think most people would say that, the biggest enemy that you have is yourself. And it's unfortunate, but that's the system and that's the society and that's all the norms that have been introduced into people's lives, essentially coming into conflict with the reality of who they are. And once you start to figure out that all those things that they have told you of how to act and how to be and who you're supposed to be and what defines you, all those things are essentially bullshit, and that, there's a person inside you that's capable of being your best friend. And they're willing to help you if you figure out how to. And that's really the difference is soul bonding is taking that enemy within you and turning him into your best friend. And all the capabilities that best friend or that enemy has to thwart you can also be used to help you.
Right.
And so that really makes a huge difference. And that's where you really start to understand trusting yourself, trusting your own intuition, your own gut feelings that things can be anything you want if you just want them. And then, of course, incorporating that back into the Octologue, where you can now take the person that you are and introduce them to the other people, and they can go, holy cow, wow, you are amazing. And be available to help them do the same thing.
Right.
Means that, the world is going to be a much, much different place if people really grasp what this is all about.
I agree. Totally agree. And I am looking forward, as I have been for quite a while, I am looking forward to these ideas catching on to the point where there are enough people practicing these methods that it becomes self-sustaining. It's not quite there yet, but it's growing. More and more people are catching on, and people are hearing your message. and you have quite a following of friends and admirers and people who respect you, that message is getting out. And I am really grateful that this is finally happening. I've looked forward to it for a long time and didn't know how to get it started properly, but it's happening. And we have a wonderful future ahead of us just by continuing to get the word out the way we're doing right now.
Well, the beautiful thing about the Octologue and about soul bonding is these are things that don't require any money. Mm-mm. They don't require any objects. You don't have to build a building or buy some mechanism to do it. It's all self-work and working with the people around you. And the thing is that if you took an Octologue and put it in any circumstance where you have people working together, you're going to find that it's going to be successful. People are going to improve each other's lives. And if they understand that and they start to incorporate that into their lives, then, we've talked about what will the future look like when the Octologue is completely realized and the holomats are completely realized. Well, people probably won't even know that they're in Octologue. People won't even know that there's a holomat. They'll just understand that everybody around them is working to their benefit.
Right. The holomat will become to the people in it like water is to the fish. It'll be taken for granted, and it will work. And it will increase the level of consciousness of our whole species. This is something that I've thought about for quite a while. And John David Garcia described it as the next, what did he call it?
Quadrature.
Right, the quadrature.
Dimensional quadrature.
Exactly, that's the word I was looking for.
I had a hard time with it too.
Yeah, well, for some reason, my memory grabs it and lets it go and grabs it and lets it go all the time. It's such a far future thing in a way, because according to my reckoning, when what we are doing now is sufficiently widespread, we can expect that there will be a level of awareness beyond what any of us perceive individually, that our species, the holomat that will encompass the world, will have a level of awareness such that we'll know it has happened when our institutions are making ethical decisions. Today, our institutions, whether you're talking corporations, governments, you name it, big schools, school systems, and so on, they consistently make unethical decisions. Oh, that's what we're attempting to change. That's what we are changing. And when we can look around and say, oh, what do you know? Human institutions make ethical decisions by default. That will indicate that this dimensional quadrature has taken place. Something totally new. That will be to humanity what the development or evolution of the brain, the intellectual level of the brain, when that last level of awareness came into human experience, there was a dimensional quadrature, and people became aware of being aware. This is what I regard as consciousness, is awareness of awareness. If I'm aware, then if I can reflect on my thoughts and memories, if I can reflect on them and think about them, I am self-aware to that degree. I have a consciousness. As far as we can tell, most critters, animals, don't have that. It came about with the most recent development in the human evolution of the brain. And the part of the brain, the outer cortex, cerebral cortex, is the most recent evolutionary development of the brain. And we see that in some critters. We see it in the great apes, we see it in cetaceans, we see it in elephants, and we get glimpses or glimmers of it in certain kinds of parrots for some reason. But other than that, critters don't have it. They don't have consciousness. They do have awareness. And this is the point at which I take exception to some of the people who equate awareness with consciousness. There is a distinctly different thing happening in consciousness than is simply awareness. You know, if you poke a worm, it'll react like a reflex. That's not consciousness. That's not the same thing as what humans experience. We can think about our thoughts. We're aware of being aware. That makes us conscious. And there's a very limited number of critters who have that. So to me, that's a very important distinction. And it draws a line in my awareness. It contributes to my ability to act ethically, to recognize that the ethics is only relevant to beings that have consciousness. You cannot talk about the ethics of a spider. They're not capable of ethics, because ethics requires consciousness.
Well, I think, talking about the system, I'm kind of reminded of I was watching a video the other day about health and diet, and the guy was talking about, a particular idea, and what he was saying is that you have like a Labrador retriever inside your head, which is, I guess, what he would describe as the lower brain functions, right?
Mammalian brain.
Like if you put a bowl of food in front of a Labrador dog, he's going to say, "Oh, food, eat it." Right. It doesn't matter if it's, a high quality meat or a low quality meat or cat food or fish or anything else. If he thinks it's food, he's going to eat it. And so I think that that's kind of what the system of control is these days, is they understand that the human has some weaknesses and that those weaknesses can be exploited. And so they've allowed a lot of these things, especially in things like advertising, for example, to really predominate people's minds and trigger people in different fashions. And essentially what we're trying to do is understand that certainly is a function of our brain, but that function, that dog, can essentially be trained to do what we want it to do. And so most people are experiencing a dog that's essentially run wild. They've never been able to train their dog. And so that's what people would describe as the enemy within, because when you want that dog to do something, an untrained dog isn't going to be very good at sicking the burglar or something like that when it's running out the back door for the steak or something that the burglar threw.
Right.
So essentially, that dog is useless. But to someone that understands through soul bonding that dog can be trained, it's a much more useful dog. And that's that's essentially where people really start to understand the trust that they have within themselves. That once you have that bond, that understanding, the expectations, all those things in alignment, that, wow, you can do so much more. And look at what dogs can do. Dogs, have got a lot of, really can help humans in many different ways. They can be a companion, they can sniff bombs, they can do all kinds of neat things if they're trained. But if they're just running wild, who knows what's possible? Not very much.
Right. Right. You mentioned that advertising is one of the adverse effects or adverse phenomena that influence us. And I see propaganda generally as being that way. I think advertising is just a particular form of propaganda. I suppose one could go the other way and say that propaganda is a form of advertising, but I tend to see it the other way.
Well, I think, I was just talking to someone about this the other day, that we've installed a lot of software in our mind through the media, through school, and through other things. And essentially, there's a conversation that one has to have with their subconscious mind about what is the value of that information.
Mm-hmm.
And once you have a connection with your subconscious mind, and it can essentially say, you know, that advertising is untrustworthy.
Right. Exactly.
And essentially deal with it as such.
In fact, the propaganda almost forces us to presume that the unethical institutions are trustworthy. That's what we're being told all the time. Government, organized religion, big banks. We're expected to trust these organizations, even though we know they are almost never honest with us.
Absolutely.
How does that make sense?
Well, I think the average commercial has something like 20 or 30 fallacies in it per 30 seconds.
So, 1 second.
So essentially you have lies coming at you all the time.
Right.
And essentially without being able to talk with your subconscious about, hey, don't put the value on that you think it is.
Right.
Put it on as that's very untrustworthy. That's very low value information.
Right. This really strikes at the very heart of the political process, because politicians lie all the time. I mean, it's a very common awareness among people today. How do you know when a politician's lying? Well, his lips are moving. Oh, well, that's how they lie. And yet, in spite of people knowing that, they are conditioned to be obedient, subservient, cooperative with government, giving up their rights for bogus reasons. It's very hard to rationalize the way people respond, knowing that all of this stuff from politics is lies.
Yeah, well, I guess it's just the thought occurred to me that the Labrador, the dog inside of your head, is actually not just completely wild. It's been trained by the system.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's been trained to your detriment.
Yes.
And it's a reversible process, fortunately.
But that's the thing that that government relies on, and that's why the politicians are big liars, is because they can be.
Right.
Because they can rely on people's weaknesses to essentially perpetuate their system.
This is why I've said repeatedly that governments take advantage of the existence of character structure. The things that we do to keep from knowing who we really are, that we were conditioned to do when we were very small, those things make us vulnerable to these liars. They are able to take advantage of the fact that we really don't know, most of us, most of the time, don't really know who we are. It's been hidden from us. And the government takes advantage of that. They don't control the formation of character structure, but they certainly take advantage of it. So,
well, I certainly think they try and influence it. They try and put people in situations, just like putting the second parent to work has certainly been at a detriment to child development.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with that they do everything they can to keep us ignorant and to misinform us. As long as we're buying the lies, come to think of it, if you ask anyone, I've never found someone who thinks politicians are honest. I've never met such a person. They do qualify, they say, oh yeah, politicians lie, but we'll pick the one that seems to lie the lesser evil. And they seem to think that's normal, that's the only choice available, as opposed to, do not believe these guys because they lie. And so on one level, they say, oh yeah, they're liars, I don't trust them. On another level, though, on the subconscious level, they don't see a choice.
Right.
And this is where the soul bonding is so powerful, it gives us more choices.
Absolutely. Well, it gives us the ability to train that dog.
Yeah.
That they've trained.
Yeah, to retrain it.
Actually, bond yourself with that dog. Make that dog your best friend.
Right. That takes the government out of the equation. When you have that level of trust internally, you become, what's the word for it, immune to certain kinds of influence. And that immunity is very powerful. We see it in our community. We see all kinds of people in our community who are outgrowing their character structure, who are beginning to do things and become aware of things that they had not previously let themselves be aware of. I'm very excited seeing this happening.
Well, you mentioned that you've never seen a politician that lies. I'm sure a lot of the audience is familiar with Ron Paul. Ron Paul is probably one of the few politicians that I think is relatively judged as being honest. There's a few questions about some of his decisions, but for the most part, he's been a very honest and honorable man. And in doing so, what has that really got him? I mean, it's certainly got him respect in some areas, but in reality, I don't think he's even introduced one bill that's ever passed Congress.
Right.
So
he's sort of the conscience. He's like Congress has this conscience called Ron Paul, whom they ignore.
Yeah.
And they ignore it because that's what psychopaths do. They ignore the conscience. They don't acknowledge it. They don't experience it. They're not aware of having conscience. And because of that, they can do all kinds of unethical things and feel no remorse, no empathy for anyone. And I believe that a lot of what Ron Paul has said is true and factual and accurate. And I am really perplexed by the fact that he became a politician. Given his awareness, why would he become a politician? Here's a guy that ran for office. The last time he ran for office, he was the most popular candidate out there, arguably, and yet his own party would not allow him to attend their big convention where they were going to decide who's going to run, et cetera, et cetera. He was forbidden. He was excluded.
Right, and that's essentially the system also sending a message that if you're an honest man, you're not going to be invited to the big party.
Right.
You're going to lose. You're going to have to struggle. You're going to have to suffer. You're going to have to, basically be at odds with everything all the time. And that's quite a message. But I think I think Ron Paul served the purpose. He certainly woke me up to a lot of things.
You and a lot of people.
And so I certainly, have a lot of gratitude for what he did. Mm-hmm. But I would say that, it's one of these things where as we, in my life, as I've gotten older, I've certainly gotten wiser. And, being an honest man, doing what you say you're going to do isn't enough.
Right.
It's got to do with being honest with yourself.
Right.
And, even though you can be considered trustworthy isn't enough in the system that we're in.
Right.
Because, even though we can work together with other people, we still don't know where we're at.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and we still are faced with, who am I? Really? Down deep, who am I? And until we get some really good answers to that, we have a very hard time presenting ourselves to others in a way that is honest. And so there's sort of built into us genetically, in some ways, these obstacles to becoming everything we're capable of being. And I do see this changing now, that we know now how to make change. We know how to find out who we are on a very deep level, and we know now how to share that with others. We know now how to form organizations that are ethical, where ethical decisions are the norm rather than the exception. All of this knowledge exists right now and is available to anyone who wants it. And so we're now in a race our opponents. They want to shut us down. They want to keep this knowledge from getting out. They don't even know yet how powerful this knowledge is, and already they're opposing it in some ways.
Well, they've always been very successful, and I've recently been looking at, the control mechanism. I've been trying to understand what is and how has the current reality been brought about. Mm-hmm. And there's a great deal of involvement in what has happened. I guess to some degree, it's fortunate that it's a very small number of people that have used the method that they have to institute the control that they have in the system.
True.
And so I'm really excited about the circumstances that we have. The fact that it's a race. I'm not so sure it's a race. I don't even really. I'm really just happy to know that we have the knowledge, because I don't think it can be stopped, especially with the internet. They've whether they did it for control or whatever, they've instituted the internet. They've given us that tool, and now we have the information that we need, and it's essentially all about just spreading that message. But again, I think there's also got to be one other thing, and that is an example that it actually works, and that's what we're doing.
That's what we're building. Absolutely. I do think that there is a race, and I would argue that what we're dealing with is a society of parasites. And parasites, we know, historically and biologically, they tend to destroy the host. And I do see that, for example, if we were to start flying military planes, that is to say, if the U.S. government starts flying military planes over Syria, there's a very good chance of them getting shot down by the Russians, which could trigger World War III and the end of humanity. I do see that something like that, whether it happens in Syria, or it happens in the South China Sea, or it happens in Ukraine, or it happens in the United States, wherever it is, I see that the trend is increasing entropy, that things are becoming worse. And I don't see that reversing unless we're successful. I think if it continues the way it's going, our species probably, at some point, there will be a blow up and we'll mostly be extinct. And even if some people survive, what's the big advantage of surviving in a world that's radioactive and where people are dying in vast numbers and so on?
Well, though, you've got to, I think, take into account that, the mechanism that they really use to stay in control is fear.
Right.
And what they present as a fearful message isn't always necessarily true.
Right.
The fact that most people, I really have doubts about just about everything that the government says they're capable of doing.
Uh-huh.
And, more than likely, most people do. If they see what government promises, they absolutely deliver a great deal less.
Actually, they deliver the opposite of what they promise. They promise peace, prosperity, and freedom, and these are the things they're destroying every day.
Yeah. So, but the thing is that they've put across a level of fear that most people are familiar with, and most people are almost comfortable with, being in fear all the time.
Yeah.
And this is not necessary. And so,
agreed.
Essentially you can worry about things that you can do something about and do something about them, or you can worry about things you can't do anything about and waste a lot of time.
Well, when I think about the possible extinction of our species, it doesn't make me worry. It gives me a sense of urgency. And that sense of urgency has been driving me for quite a while now. And I relish it. I like having a sense of urgency because I'm much more effective. And I think everyone, when they have a sense of urgency about doing something, they're more apt to get busy doing it.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying that when it comes to a message of fear, because, essentially that's an appeal to your emotion, and typically emotional decisions are not very accurate. And so I feel like I'm not worried about the U.S. government.
Good.
I'm not worried about nuclear war. I'm not worried about any of it. In fact, I think of even if the worst happens, it's similar to a forest fire. A forest fire comes through, burns everything down, but then before long, things start sprouting out of the ground.
If they're surviving,
it essentially renews everything.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's the opportunity. Maybe it's just the opportunity of where we are today. Where the low mental ability of our society is at such a low that this might be the forest fire that we're looking for. That people just are in such a bad situation. They're so caught up with all the baloney that maybe someone with the right answer, essentially, just speaking out the truth, speaking out something that I've got the answer.
Right. Yes,
is enough.
I agree with you that even if this doesn't prevent, even if what we're doing does not prevent a mass extinction or a large-scale genocide, even if it doesn't prevent that, then this may still be long-term the answer to the problem, because after that happens, people are going to need something to get back on their feet. Assuming there are people surviving, want to get back on their feet, we have mechanisms for doing it right. And maybe that's what it'll take. I don't know.
Yeah, when I was a younger man, especially when I was in the Army, I always used to think that, you could drop me anywhere on the planet, I'm going to survive. You drop me in a swamp, drop me in a forest, drop me anywhere, I'm going to make it. I know enough that no matter where you put me, I'm going to continue to live. In fact, get better every day that I'm in existence. Mm-hmm. And no matter what the situation, I'm going to improve it. But now I think, with the knowledge that I have today, that put me in any group of people, I'm going to make their lives better.
Right.
And
that's what it takes.
With this knowledge, I can't go wrong.
Absolutely.
So, if we can train those kind of people, that we just start dropping them around the planet, either through our efforts here in Acapulco or through the internet.
Right. Both.
Essentially, we're going to be dropping seeds all over the place.
Exactly.
In fertile ground.
We are seeding the ethics, and out of that grows everything we want. I love it, and I think that that's probably a good point on which to wrap up this talk. I see that we have that capability, and we're moving forward with it. And while it's perfectly okay to see the risks that we face, we're not letting that stop us. And I think that we're already at a point where enough people are aware of what we've found out and aware of the capabilities that the whole amount of Octologues represents. Combine that with the soul bonding, my goodness, we got a bright future ahead of us. And I want to invite our listeners to keep tuning in and to keep coming back and watch for my forthcoming book on soul bonding, because it's coming out this summer. It's going to be widely available, and the ebook will be available for free. And so...
Yeah, well, we've actually got something interesting. I do want to come back to, our topic was trust.
Right.
And I certainly want to come back to wrapping this whole discussion up with the idea of trust. But one of the things that we've done here recently, what I've experienced is I've had a problem with my vocabulary when talking in these podcasts. And I've tried to alter that through my subconscious mind. And I believe I'm succeeding at that.
You are.
And so in doing so, I'm demonstrating the power of what we're talking about. That this is an example of what we're talking about. The fact that I can express myself more and more clearly each and every day means that this stuff works.
Right.
And so that's something that people can build trust on.
True.
Is that when they see that something is demonstrated, that what someone says can be done actually is done, that's something to build trust on.
Cool. I love it.
All right, so that's a wrap up for this one. This is episode 18.
Yep.
Any ideas of what we want to talk about in episode 19, Bob?
Frankly, no. I haven't thought ahead to the next
well,
episode. Well,
stay tuned. We'll probably come up with something wonderful. I don't know, but stick with us.
Yes, please.
We'll keep putting out valuable content.
All right.
And thanks a lot. We'll see you later.
All right. Bye-bye.